5 years after the events of the first film, Elphaba is living in exile, while Glinda is reveling in the perks of being a popular figure in Emerald City. But even though time has torn these two friends apart, they must come together again in order to change themselves and all of Oz for good. So, this movie explores the relationship between Elphaba and Glinda as they embrace their new identities as the Wicked Witch of the West and Glinda the Good. And their story is a really engaging one. Unfortunately, I don't think Wicked for Good is as engaging as its predecessor. It's definitely a good film in its own right. John M. Chu has a solid sense of direction. The colors seem to be more vibrant and lively than they were the last time around. The new songs are pretty good, the old songs are performed really well, and the central performances are undeniably outstanding. But none of that keeps the film from feeling a little messy. Wicked for Good excels when it's focusing squarely on the relationship between Glinda and Elphaba. But the story stumbles a bit when the spotlight isn't on these two characters specifically. And I think that's because the film is actively trying to be a bit more mature and complex. I mean, the movie does open with the scene involving slave labor after all, and the entire story has very clear themes involving racism and immigration. Elphaba challenging the wizard's totalitarian regime is not too dissimilar from people resisting ICE raids in America today, which only reinforces the idea that Wicked has always been a socially relevant story, and that anyone who claims that the movies are woke clearly misunderstands the point of said story in the first place. So I respect that the film has grown alongside its characters. However, it can be hard to take the subject matter seriously when some of the characters come across as a bit silly. I liked Ethan Slater's portrayal of Bach in the first film, but I didn't care for his overly serious performance here. And the same goes for Marissa Bode as Nessa. I loved Jonathan Bailey's lively portrayal of Fiyero, but he barely has anything to do in this film. Speaking of which, Coleman Domingo's Cowardly Lion, Jeff Goldblum's Wizard of Oz, and Michelle Yeoh's Madame Morrible barely have anything to do either. Peter Dinklage doesn't even get the chance to speak as Dr. Dillamond. So Glinda and Elphaba are the only ones who really get to shine here because they're the only two characters to get any kind of proper development. Thankfully, Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo are both fantastic. Much like with the first film, they are the heart and soul of this movie, and the performance of For Good is undeniably touching. So, I absolutely loved the dynamic between their two characters, especially since that dynamic and their friendship gets tested in this film. Because that story, along with the themes that I mentioned earlier, help make the movie feel all the more powerful and emotionally resonating. I just think part 1 was a bit more focused and streamlined, is all. It may have been longer, but narratively speaking, it definitely felt tighter. And maybe that's because Part 1 operates as a pretty solid prequel. With a few minor tweaks, it could easily act as a standalone feature film without Part 2. But Wicked for Good does not have that same luxury, because it already functions as the back half of one story, but that half is also split in half since the movie is set during the events of The Wizard of Oz. So the film spends a lot of time connecting to a completely different story altogether. And that made for a rather distracting experience, in my opinion. I don't mind tying back to The Wizard of Oz. I just wish the film was able to stand a bit more on its own 2 feet. But even though it may not live up to the heights of its predecessor, I still think this is a pretty good movie. Glinda would say so anyway. So, while this review may have been a bit negative, I want to make it clear that I am grateful for these two films. Because the Broadway play didn't resonate with me as much as I thought it would, but I'm sure that these two movies will stick with me for the rest of my life. And that's exactly why, even in spite of my issues with it, Wicked for Good would still get a recommendation from me. But be sure to let me know what you thought of the film, and as always, thanks for watching.